you know, fixing Eastern Congo requires dealing with some of these rebel groups, requires dealing with the influence of Rwanda, and absolutely requires dealing with the Congolese government. And, you know, it's been interesting to watch that also, I think, over the past 15 years is the attempts on occasion to tackle some governance issues and how frequently that has failed, as much by the Congolese as by the international community. And I'll just a few anecdotes that for me have kind of summed that up. I found fascinating how in the year in lead up to the Congolese elections, the most recent Congolese elections of 2012, how there was such a desire by international diplomats to have influence over President Joseph Kabila. And there became this kind of constant refrain in Kinshasa, who's spoken to the president? Because the president became quite reticent to speak to the international community. And so there was very little ability to influence him, it was felt at the time. And how things change when President Kabila faces a crisis and needs the international community. All of a sudden, the doors to the president's office were wide open, and he was very keen to engage. But when it was issues about internal Congolese government politics, about corruption, about reform of the army, about reform of the Electoral Commission, the door to the international community was firmly shut. And there were far too many diplomats in the international community willing to accept that, in my opinion. And it became this kind of constant game in Kinshasa. And I think in some ways that's why there is now an opportunity to not just focus on the crisis in the East, but because the Congolese government needs the international community and SADC and the region more than it ever has, now is the time to also say that comes with other conditions. And that has got to include reform of the Electoral Commission, opening up of political space, ensuring that Parliament is able to do its job, starting to demand security sector reform, and a number of those other things. And the list is very long in that regard. But, you know, I'm quite pessimistic about the future of Congo, in part because of the governance issues. And I agree with you, James. I think this continues to be a pretty classic failed state, actually, and we haven't come out of that yet. And in part, that's why its neighbors can so easily manipulate events across the border. And that is something that needs to stop. I don't yet see much hope for that. And I am deeply disappointed by the last elections and the fact that the international community allowed such flawed and corrupt elections to stand.
So I think there will have to be a negotiated process that brings the M23 and government together. I don't know what form that will take. But my prediction is that they won't be able to go back into the field and upset the apple cart in Eastern DRC again. I think the regional framework agreement, if it happens, which is due to be signed on the 24th, is a very important part of that. Whether the SADC forces ever arrive, you know, the promised 4,000 troops, is almost less important to me than the political commitment of South Africa, Angola, Tanzania. They've turned a blind eye, in some senses, to events in Eastern DRC for a long time, that they are now prepared to engage, you know, and hopefully the battle between SADC and the UN over the status of the forces will be overcome and an agreement will be signed. And it raises the stakes even further for the DRC's neighbours, notably Rwanda. You know, we're used to somehow watching Congolese and UN troops being humiliated by Rwandan-backed rebel groups. And it doesn't sort of surprise anybody. But I think the costs of humiliating Tanzanian or South African troops are significantly higher. And the costs politically to going against the grain of what SADC and the region seems to be wanting, I think are very high. So a chance for change.